Hey y'all, what's good? And welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much. Let's remember to have healthy dialogue, be respectful to ourselves and to each other, and to challenge the argument and not the person. Let's get it. Crystal Dozier was the responsible child, the one her mother could count on to keep order at the house and watch her younger siblings. My little mother hen, her mom Florence Bray said in a recent interview. She smiled at the memory. As a girl, Dozier got a thrill from acting like a grown up. She spent hours in the kitchen learning from her mother how to season a roast, fried chicken, or make a pot of beans. And she loved getting dressed up in the frilly matching outfits that she and her sister wore. She might emerge from her room dolled up in a mismatched ensemble of hat, heels, and long dresses for a trip to church or the doctor's office. My sister was a prissy girl, said her younger sister, Annetta Bell. She liked to look cute, but when she plunged into the ugly world of crack cocaine as a young teen, her life spun out of control and she developed an addiction that she never fully shaked. Years later, she met a gruesome end on Imperial Avenue. The mother of seven was 35 when she disappeared in 2007, the first of the 11 Imperial Avenue victims to go missing. Dozier hadn't been seen in 2.5 years when investigators dug up her body in 2009 by a fence in Anthony Sowell's backyard. The suspect in the serial killings wasn't unknown to Dozier, her family has learned. Friends told them Dozier had sometimes accepted rides from Sowell, who lived close to her. He had been a shadowy presence in her life, not a boyfriend, but someone she occasionally partied with, relatives said. Someone who provided her with drugs, they said. Men and drugs. The two had been a pervasive pattern in Dozier's life. They took control of Dozier's life at an early age, and she never broke free, relatives said. Dozier was born in 1971, the second oldest of Eugene and Florence Dozier's four children. The young family lived for a time on Kinsman Road and then stable Mount Pleasant before foreclosures, crime, and eventually the Imperial Avenue tragedy became signals of the neighborhood's collapse. Dozier went to Alexander Hamilton Junior High School and attended John F. Kennedy High for a time. Her mother, Bray, remembers getting a shock when she took 13-year-old Dozier to the pediatrician. Crystal has something to tell you, Bray recalled the doctor saying. Dozier was pregnant. While still a child herself, she gave birth to a son. The relationship with the 17-year-old father didn't last long. And at the age of 14, Dozier was pregnant again, this time by a 20-year-old man. Bray, by then a divorcee, raising four kids alone, said she was angry that older guys were preying on her teen daughter, and she battled them for control. We tried to move out of the area, Bray said. We moved to East Cleveland, but Dozier didn't want to be with her family. She moved in with the father of her second child. He coerced her into running away. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep, Bray said. I sat outside. I walked up and down the streets looking for my child. That's a scary, hurting feeling. I was a wreck. I didn't know where my child was. I didn't know if she was all right. She was afraid of him after he run her won her oh sorry. She was afraid of him after he won her over. He coerced her into doing stuff and she did it. He had total control over her. Dozier and her boyfriend went on to have six children together. They married after having their second child in 1987 when a no nonsense judge ordered them to do so. If you're going to keep making kids, you're going to have to marry her, Bray remembers the female judge saying to the boyfriend. Dozier would have been about 16 at the time. It was during that time in her life, Cuyahoga County social services records indicate that she became addicted to crack cocaine. The man she married would go on to rack up a long list of arrests and charges. Between 1987 and 2006, he was arrested 5 times on charges ranging from drug abuse to grand theft and breaking and entering. Attempts to contact him were unsuccessful. A social worker in 1987 described Dozier and her husband as unfit parents. In one document, she noted that Dozier's oldest child, Anthony, had marks on his body from beatings. Anthony Dozier, now 26, believed his mom was only 14 when she got hooked on crack. He and his siblings were taken from her custody at an early age. Dozier's mother took in the two oldest, Anthony and Antonia, and the 5 other kids entered the foster care system. Several relatives said the only relationship Dozier seemed committed to was her stormy marriage. It was so many chances she had to walk away, Anthony Dozier told a reporter last year. She didn't want to. That was my mother's problem. She loved him to the point that whatever he asked her to do, she would do it. Whether it was using drugs or anything, she just did it. Drugs ruin people's lives. It's not just one person's life, it's an entire family. Crystal Dozier's first arrest came in 1997 when she was 25 for attempted possession of drugs. For the next 6 years, a string of arrests followed, with charges escalating from possession to theft and drug trafficking. Her mother, Bray, served time in 1993 on a drug charge, which caused her 2 grandchildren she had taken in to be shuffled between the homes of other relatives until authorities stepped in and sent them separate foster homes. Bray said that for her and her daughter, drugs served as an escape. Bray said she was raped as a child by a relative and struggled with abusive family relationships all her life. Drugs and alcohol take you to a point where you're in another world. You ain't got to feel pain and hurt that you feel every day, she said. Bray said she was sad to see her daughter got hooked on crack, but she understood how it happened. Bray said she too wasted her years chasing her next high until she finally found the will to get sober. Drug addiction is a bad sucker, Bray said. It's a blessing now to look in the refrigerator and the cabinet, she said, and have a choice of what she wants to eat instead of going hungry. Drug dependence has become something passed down by the generations, especially in Cleveland's low income neighborhoods, where youth grow up surrounded by physical, emotional, and sexual trauma, said Mary Basie, executive director of Hitchcock Center for Women. One of the treatment programs Dozier attended This was one of the several treatment programs that Dozier attended while at the center. It's not uncommon to have both mothers and daughters needing treatment, Basie said. Dozier gave each of her 7 children a name beginning with the letter A. She stayed in touch with her oldest 2, but she never put it together and unified her family. Her 4 youngest daughters ended up adopted by one family, while son Andre was adopted by another foster mother. He died at age 11 from complications from asthma, relatives said. Feeling like a failure at mothering contributed to Dozier's depression, said her sister Annetta Bell. She didn't know how to deal with not having her kids around her, Bell said. To find out her son had passed away, that really weighed heavily on her. Dozier's daughter Antonia said the years she spent in foster care were miserable, yet she doesn't resent her mom. My mom was young, she said. She went through a lot of things in her childhood on her own. The 24-year-old medical assistant said in a 2010 interview that she loved her occasional visits with her mom, and she never perceived her mother as an addict. Everybody has a typical view of what a crack addict looks like, she said. She didn't look like any of those things. She was what a mother was supposed to be: loving, nurturing, caring. My mother, I honestly believe she was born to be a nurturer because she took anybody who was in her life, she took care of them. Anybody who met her loved her. Only thing bad about her that you could say was that she had a habit, and that was it. But Dozier's drug habit affected all facets of her life. In the same way that she glided in and out of her kids' lives, Dozier missed court dates and frequently ended up violating probation. There were times when it seemed Dozier had turned a corner and put the drug scene behind her. Family members said her relationship with her father of 6 of her children broke up in 1994, and she later married Robert Pennington. He had her off drugs, Anthony Dozier said. She was clean for a long time with Bobby. But neither Pennington nor anyone else succeeded in truly ending Dozier's addiction. Dozier was sent to prison for 10 months for drug trafficking in 2004. Pennington died while she was still behind bars. Still, she tried to help other inmates during her incarceration. The family later learned from people who did time with Dozier. She ministered to the women in jail, Bell said. She had a caring soul. She cared about everybody, but she didn't take good care of herself. By 2006, she was using again, and her family tried an intervention. We all sat down and told her this couldn't happen anymore, Bray said. She understood. Things got a little better. Dozier had a steady boyfriend, and she brought in money cleaning homes and styling hair. She wasn't just out there in the streets, Bray said. Bell said the last time she saw Dozier was in 2007. It was an important moment of reconciliation. Bell has spent years not speaking to her sister. Dozier had used Bell's name as an alias during an arrest. It took years for Bell to clear her name. We were just starting the healing process, Bell said, remembering that they laughed and talked that day while eating plates of tacos that Dozier had made. She was a wonderful cook, relatives said. For them, it was a glimmer of a girl who loved being in the kitchen with her mom. The worst was behind them, they believed. She was calling family members regularly and had lengthy periods of sobriety. But then the calls and visits stopped. Anthony Dozier, who had just returned from a stint in the Marine Corps, filed a missing person report on June 11th, 2007. For the next 2 years, he often cruised Cleveland streets at night looking for her. Family members said they put up flyers seeking information on Dozier's whereabouts, but they often mysteriously disappeared. When a friend mentioned that Dozier might be visiting a house on Imperial Avenue, Anthony Dozier went to check it out but found nothing. It was a few doors away from Anthony Sowell's home. Investigators found her body buried in the backyard of Sowell's house in the fall of 2009. Bray spoke at her daughter's funeral. She made no excuses for her daughter's life. Several of Dozier's children said they wanted to break the cycle of intergenerational despair the family had suffered. Anthony and Antonia Dozier both said they want to make sure they're around for their kids. Antonia Dozier, a graduate of Cleveland Healthcare's Career Center, High School, and Sanford Brown Institute, is determined to be a stable mother for her three children. She says she only wishes she had gotten her career off the ground faster so she could have offered shelter and support for her mom. I always felt like I could have been a factor in my mother's life to help her really get off. Sorry, I always felt like I could have been a factor in my mother's life to help her really get herself together. And if she was here today, that would be something I would be working on, she said. I can't make anybody do anything. You have to want it for yourself. But she did. She honestly did. I really would have been there for her to help her get herself together. Rest in peace, Crystal Dozier. Tashana Culver didn't let her own problems stop her from helping others. She and her boyfriend had just moved into a small apartment on East 64th Street and Bundy Drive in 2003 after being homeless. They had slept on the grounds of Woodland Hills Park for 2 months. Money was tight, and it wasn't the greatest apartment, but it was a fresh start. She spent weeks cleaning the place in hopes of reuniting her family and raising her children there. One night, she cooked salmon patties, rice, and string beans for her and her boyfriend, Carl Johnson. After they ate, Culver fixed two plates and took them to two homeless men who slept in a van across the street. I asked her why, and I was kind of upset because we were struggling, Johnson recalled in a recent interview. She just told me that the Lord had blessed us for the day and it was time for us to be a blessing to someone else. Culver, 33, had troubles of her own, many of them self inflicted, but she never lost her kindness, friends, and relatives said. She drifted in and out of the family's lives so often that they didn't report her missing when she disappeared in 2008. They thought she was with Johnson. And when police discovered the remains of 11 women in a house on Imperial Avenue, Just down the street from her mother's house, where Culver once lived, the family wondered if she was one of the victims. Their worst fears were realized on November 5th, 2009, when the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office identified Culver's remains. Neighbors who lived near Culver's home said that they had seen Anthony Sowell, the man prosecutors call a serial killer, on the street, but relatives didn't know him. Investigators say Sowell used drugs and alcohol to lure women to his home. Culver could have been a ripe target for such a predator. She gave over a large portion of her life and sometimes her body to the pursuit of drugs. The addiction consumed her. It caused her to turn her back on her children, several of whom were born while she was in prison, leaving relatives with the responsibility of raising them. It caused her to sell her body for money, and it caused her to allow men into her life who used her and abused her. Her 26-year-old sister, Latanya Irby, believes the death of a boyfriend sparked Culver's drug use. The couple had talked about marriage, and his death threw Culver into a depression. She turned to drugs as an escape from reality, and she began a downward spiral that would end in her death. Culver was born August 31st, 1978, at University Hospitals in Cleveland. Her parents, Yvonne Williams and Sam Culver Jr., had been high school sweethearts. The young family lived in an apartment near East 55th Street and Chester Avenue. Both her parents' relationships ended before Culver's first, but her parents' relationship ended before Culver's first birthday. We had differences on how we viewed life, Williams said recently. He went one way and I went another. He didn't want the responsibilities of being a young father. Sam Culver Jr., a former steelworker, was a small time crook with theft convictions going back to 1980, according to court records. Over the years, he graduated to violent felonies and is now serving a 10-year prison sentence for aggravated robbery. He is to be released in June. Tashana Culver's dad was in and out of his daughter's life, Williams said. His parents took her to church on occasion, but stayed involved with their Williams' parents stayed involved with their granddaughter, a trip to Disney World, family functions, spending holidays and birthdays together. Williams moved to her grandmother's house near East 120th Street and Buckeye Road after she split with Sam Culver Jr. Williams later worked as a nursing assistant for the Visiting Nurses Association. Williams' grandmother, Caledonia Williams, spoiled Culver, buying her strawberry shortcake and Cabbage Patch dolls. Culver played with her doll's hair, putting it in different styles. It led to a skill that could have been her career in her life if her life hadn't gone off the rails. She attended Harvey Rice Elementary School and was a Brownie Scout. She participated in the dance line at Charles A. Mooney School. By the time she entered John Adams High School, she had begun to write poetry. Neighborhood girls stopped by after school so Culver could style their hair. Culver was a fighter in her teen years. It wasn't uncommon for her to get into squabbles with girls or even boys if they rubbed her the wrong way, her mother said. Tashana was short, a little under 5 feet, but she would be full of fight if you made her angry enough, Williams said. But that made her no less appealing to the young men in the area. She had her first child during her sophomore year in high school. She did not stay with her child's father. After she graduated, she earned a cosmetology license from the former Vogue Beauty Academy on Payne Avenue. She also trained to be a nursing assistant. She fell in love with Marcus Johnson. He was her longtime boyfriend and they planned to marry, but he was found shot in the head in 1998 in Gordon Park in Cleveland. A police report said a man who went to the park found him dead on a sidewalk with a gun near his side. The coroner's office ruled the death a homicide. Culver's family said his death devastated her. She sank into a depression and sought comfort in drugs in the arms of the wrong men. Irby, her younger sister, said Culver had a string of pregnancies and failed relationships, and Culver continued to abuse drugs. Her mother and sister eventually took in Culver's children. Culver was sporadic. Culver had a sporadic 8-year relationship with Carl Johnson, who is not related to Marcus Johnson. He said he is the father of 3 of her 6 children. They met in 2000 while she was waiting for a bus at East 120th Street and Buckeye Road. She tried to bum a cigarette and he thought she was cute. I got nervous and couldn't find any cigarettes, so I gave her $20 and my phone number, Johnson said. They hit it off, but one of the things they had in common was a drug problem. They drank together, smoked Mary Jane together, and did crack together. He said Culver sold her soul for sex to get money for drugs. Johnson, who is now sober and lives in a treatment center in Akron, hated how she got the money, but it didn't stop him from smoking crack she bought. Addiction is a sickness, and I'm not proud of anything I did, Johnson, 41, said. Whenever she put that red lipstick on, I knew what it meant. Unless I tied her down, there was no way I could stop her. I hated to watch the person I love hop in and out of cars. They lived in rooms, apartments in Cleveland, East Cleveland. They lived with relatives at times until they wore out their welcome. Culver's mother, who raised some of of her daughter's children, sometimes brought them to see their parents at Freewood Lane, a bowling alley in Wickliffe where Johnson worked. He said the family would bowl together and play arcade games. She loved her kids, Johnson said of Culver. She would talk about them all of the time, and she just had a big smile on her face whenever she could see them. In 2004, Williams and Johnson tried to make a fresh start in Akron. They attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings and got jobs at the Rubbermaid factory, Johnson said. Culver made extra money styling hair. They stayed clean for a few months at a time, but eventually returned to using. Sometimes they fought. Culver was arrested in 2005 for domestic violence after she punched Johnson and tried to stab him. He said he provoked the fight to get her arrested. I didn't want her using when she was pregnant, and I knew she wouldn't stop, he said. I would call h- I would call her and get her arrested because I knew she would get to the drugs. I wasn't mad at her, but she was carrying our child. Johnson got clean in 2006. Culver didn't, and they went their separate ways. She ended up in jail and gave birth to her last child in 2007. Johnson was the father but was afraid to take custody because he was working to recover from his addiction. One of Car- One of Culver's paternal relatives took custody of the child. She returned to her family's house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland after she was released from jail. She didn't stay with them long. She walked the streets selling her body to pay for her next high. Her mother and sister told her to leave to shield the children from it. The last time they saw Culver was in 2008. The last time Johnson talked to Culver was on Valentine's Day of 2008. They talk about reconciling and putting their family back together. He took a bus to Cleveland and they had plans to meet at Tower City. She was to return to Akron with him. She never arrived. Rest in peace, Tashana Culver. For a while, it appeared LeShonda Long had a chance at a normal life. She was just 6 years old and living with her aunt after social workers took her away from her drug addicted mother and too often absent father. She made good grades in school and had perfect attendance. She participated in the DARE drug education program. She was baptized at church and participated in children's programs. Long also looked out for her siblings. She was the bossy one, relatives said. She was very motherly with her brothers and sisters, said her Aunt Caroline Long. She was always strong willed and sassy, but didn't get into any trouble. But it didn't last. Long became pregnant by age 14, had 3 children before she was old enough to vote, and was dead by 25. She was the youngest of the 11 women found at Anthony Sowell's 2-story white frame house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland. Her family is unsure how she ended up in Sowell's hair, but investigators say he preyed on vulnerable women who lived on the margins of society, plying them with drugs before taking their lives. Long fit the bill. Her life went wrong early on, and she knew at a young age that if she didn't change, she wouldn't live long. She foretold it in letters she wrote when she got in trouble. I can honestly say that at the rate that I am going, I'll be dead before I'm 18. Long wrote to former Cuyahoga County juvenile judge in October 2000. Long was born in 1984 to a mother. addicted to crack cocaine, and a father who didn't pay enough attention to her in her early years. According to relatives and court records, friends and relatives said in recent interviews her problems were rooted in her troubled youth. Her mother, Jewel, popped in and out of the picture during her childhood. Long's father, Jim Allen, assumed responsibility for raising Long and her siblings because of their mother's transience. Allen lived with the children and his grandmother in a house on Folsom Avenue. But in 1990, a social worker visited the house and found six children ages 1 to 13 home alone. Long was the third oldest. Allen's grandmother was on a vacation in California. She had repeatedly asked the county to take custody of the children because their parents did not contribute to their care, and she was too old to care for them, according to records. A document that references the incident states the living conditions inside the home put the children at risk. The children went to foster care. But within months, Jules Long's younger sister stepped in and took custody of the six children. Caroline Long, who had two sons of her own, worked as a gas station attendant and at other odd jobs. This is what you're supposed to do for family, Caroline Long, 55, said in a recent interview. In my heart, it wouldn't have been right if they were all separated. Caroline Long tried to shield the children from their parents and their lifestyle. She moved the family to Lorain County. Long transferred from Iowa Maple Elementary School in Cleveland to Lincoln Academy in Lorain. For a while, things went well, but as Leshonda got older, her resentment over being separated from her parents surfaced. Her aunt moved the her aunt moved the family to Kokomo, Indiana, because Caroline Long got a job at a nursing home there. She thought a new environment would get she thought a new environment would give everyone a fresh start. But Long resented the move and became defiant, her aunt said. It got to the point to where she would stay out and not let me know where she was, Caroline Long said. While the other children and with her, I couldn't let them misbehave like that because it was a bad example, and the younger children would think it was okay to act like that too. She kept saying that she wanted to be with her mother and father. So one day I told her if her daddy wanted her back, she can go back home. Long was 14 when she returned to Cleveland, and it wasn't long before she started to get in trouble. She initially lived with her grandmother and later with her father and stepmother. Relatives said she would leave home often to search for her mother in the streets. She and her brothers and sisters didn't have any structure when they were young. It was hard for Leshonda to adjust to that, her aunt said. Within a year, Long made several trips to juvenile detention and became pregnant with her first child. She also ran away from home on several occasions and was reported missing to police. By the age of 17, Long had three children but was deemed unfit to raise them. She also had a record. Among her offenses were stealing a pocket computer and a pit bull and kidnapping her children from relatives who had custody of them. Janie Whitehead, a retired Ohio Department of Youth Services social worker, met Long while the girl was in detention. Long was plagued by her upbringing, Whitehead said. She never really had a handle on who she was, Whitehead said, and the root of her troubles always went to her background. Every time Long was ordered to detention, she was pregnant and ready to deliver, Whitehead said. Long gave birth to all three children while in detention. Long had a big time temper and always made herself the leader among her peers in detention, Whitehead said. If Leshonda liked you, she said. And if she didn't, well, she let you know it. Long sought refuge in her thoughts. She wrote about the pain she felt and what she wanted to do with her life, according to juvenile records. She wrote that she wanted a different life for herself and her children. When I go home, I plan to enroll in Cuyahoga Community College for a year or two so I can spend time with my children and family, she wrote in the fall of 2000. Then I plan to transfer out of state to Spelman or Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Long had the potential to go to college and be a success story, White has said. Her writing was something that could just grab you. She had a skill. If someone nurtured that, this could have different, White added. She always fought the people trying to help her, but sorry, My mouth is dry. She always fought the people trying to help her, but she never realized she had so much more to give. When Long became a legal adult, she was arrested several times. Relatives said they believed she abused Mary Jane and cocaine. Her father and other relatives had custody of her children. Long got in trouble with police a few times for taking the children away from her relatives after she visited them. She popped in and out of her family members' lives. Every now and then, she called her siblings and cousins in Indiana. Long went missing in August 2008. Her, fa- her family had reported her missing when she ran away twice as a child, but not when she became an adult. In November 2009, investigators found a skull in a bucket at Sowell's house. DNA tests confirmed the skull was Long's. The coroner broke the news to the family. It was an end to a sad story that continues to haunt them. Caroline Long's youngest son, Terry, said he believes LeShonda Long tried to fight off Sowell before she was killed. Terry Long, who works as an accountant in Cleveland, said he misses his cousin and she was like a sister. LeShonda wasn't one to back down, he said. We don't really know for sure, but with the way she was, we knew she gave him a good fight, and it might be why all they found was her skull. The last time Caroline Long talked to her niece was in 2008 during a phone conversation. LeShonda Long lamented that she had heeded the lessons her aunt and others tried to give her. She said, Auntie, I know I would have, if I would have listened to you, I would have been better off. I'm sorry for not listening. I told her that it wasn't too late and that I loved her, Caroline Long said, and that she had time together. LeShonda went missing a few months later. Rest in peace, LeShonda Long. Tanya Carmichael loved life. She lived for the good times, like in 1996 when she hopped on a plane to Las Vegas with friends to go to VIP parties at the first Mike Tyson Evander Holyfield heavyweight title fight. The Cleveland native came from humble beginnings and learned the value of work at an early age. She had a knack of finding ways to get what she wanted. She found designer clothes on the cheap. She partied at clubs and cabarets. But she had to balance being a single mother and being the life of the party. Later on, the partying got the best of her. She was once the loving and protective mother who would scold drug dealers near the doorsteps of her East Cleveland home because she didn't want drugs to influence her children. But she later became consumed by her drug addiction. It took her focus away from the values she tried to instill in her children. It strained her relationship with her family. It led her to a life of petty crimes and drug addiction and landed her, prosecutors say, in the clutches of a serial killer. She was one of the 11 women whose remains were found in 2009 in and around a house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland. They were all killed, authorities say, by Anthony Sowell, a 51-year-old registered sex offender suspected of using drugs and alcohol to tempt susceptible women. The remains of Carmichael, 53, who were the first to be identified. She had been missing for a year, but her life had gone off the rails long before. Her death was one of the string of tragedies her family has suffered. Her daughter, Marquisha, died a few months after the remains of the 11 women were found on Imperial Avenue. Carmichael's mother, Barbara, had a stroke last year. Tanya Carmichael was born in Cleveland on June 30th, 1956, and grew up on the East Side. Her parents, Barbara and Donald Carmichael Sr., divorced when she was very young. Carmichael and her brother, Donald Jr., were raised by their mother. He was in the background, but I raised them, Barbara Carmichael said. She loved her daddy and wanted us to be together. I think it bothered her. Barbara Carmichael worked as a nurse. Her daughter enjoyed gardening. She grew squash, corn, greens outside the home and sold them to people in the neighborhood. She attended, she attended Daniel E. Morgan Elementary School and she was a member of the 4-H club. Barbara Carmichael, now 73 and living in Bedford Heights, says she taught her daughter the importance of hard work. She knew what she had to do because she grew up in a home where it was like that, her mother said. Yet Carmichael gave birth to her first child, Marquisha, at age 16. She left John Hay High School and never returned, though she earned an equivalency certificate. Her brother was killed during a robbery in 1976. She had her second daughter, Donita, named after her late uncle a year later. The family moved in East Cleveland near Page and Elderwood Avenues, not far from where Anthony Sowell's family lived. Sowell enlisted in the Marines in 1977, however, and moved away. Carmichael didn't stay with the men who fathered her children, but by most accounts, she was a good mother to her daughters. She took them on vacations and tried to expose them to things that would broaden their horizons, including horseback riding and live concerts. She worked as a medical secretary and took college courses to give her children a better life than she had. Over the years, she took classes at Cuyahoga Community College in subjects including general psychology, math, business, and social science, according to her records. She also earned her barber and real estate license and worked as a medical secretary and a barmaid. Donita Carmichael said that when the crack cocaine epidemic first hit Cleveland streets, her mother chased drug dealers from near their home. They listened to her, she said. I think they respected my mother because she was on her own and they saw that she was trying to raise us right. Carmichael gave birth to a third child, a son named Jonathan, in 1985. His childhood was markedly different from that of his sisters. A different side of Carmichael had emerged. She had moved the family to Cleveland's Lee Harvard neighborhood, but often returned to her old stomping grounds in East Cleveland to find crack. She eventually was evicted from her home and lived in various rooms and apartments and at her mother's house. Her children can't pinpoint the time that they first realized she was using drugs. Jonathan Carmichael, 26, thinks his mother was introduced to drugs by an ex-boyfriend. Donita Carmichael remembers a conversation her grandmother had with her and Marquisha Carmichael in the mid 1990s. She said she needed to talk to us and took us to a Red Lobster, Donita Carmichael said. She told us our mother was sick and on drugs. We had already had our problems, and I was angry with her and kind of just stayed away after that. Donita Carmichael says she thinks the roots of her mother's addiction can be traced to the death of her father, whom relatives said she adored, and at the end of a long relationship. Donita Carmichael says she believes her mother thought she could control her habit. I think she felt that she could always stop if she wanted to, she said. By 2001, it was obvious drugs had taken control of Carmichael's life. She lost custody of her son because she left him for days at a time. Barbara Carmichael took over the task of raising her grandson. He was 12. From 2000 to 2005, Carmichael was charged with various drug and theft offenses and spent time in prison. Whenever she was released, she would stay clean for a while, but would eventually return to using. She would hold a job only long enough to make a little money to fuel her addiction and stay out of trouble with her probation officer. But Carmichael was never the stereotype of the street addict, disheveled and desperate. She loved to dress up, put on her makeup, and hit the town. She went to casinos to look and took cruises to sandy beaches in the Caribbean. But when drugs got the best of her, another side appeared. Donita Carmichael recalled a time when her mother, looking for money to buy drugs, tried to sell a camera. There was no way in hell I was going to give her any money, and she knew it, Donita Carmichael said. It was the only time she ever tried to get any money from me. The last time she saw her mother was in 2008 at Barbara Carmichael's house for a family barbecue. I only called her by her first name by that time. And we were all at my grandmother's house because we used to have a Sunday dinner, Donita Carmichael said. She just sat at the table on this Sunday and just stared at me. I asked her to stop, but I think she was just getting one last look. Rest in peace, Tanya Carmichael. Michelle Mason wanted a better life for her son. She didn't want him to fall victim to the lure of the street, drugs, and fast living, as she had to. So when he hit his teens, she got him out of Cleveland. Michelle sent her son to live with a relative in Georgia, but she talked to him every day on the phone. One day, Mason playfully dialed her son's number on her cell phone. "How you doing down there?" she asked her son Shannon. After chatting for a few minutes, Mason laughed and let in on the joke. I'm at the bus station, she said. How can I get a taxi to where you are? It was a great whirlwind visit, her son recalled in an interview last year. They ate at a diner and caught several movies at the Dollar Theater. We walked all around, he said. I showed her everything. We had fun. You wouldn't even expect your mom to be like that. I had like the coolest mom in the world. Anything I wanted to put effort into, anything I was passionate about or proud of doing, she'd support it. It was a triumphant period for Mason, who by then had kicked the heroin and crack habits that had unraveled her life. She was living independently and hadn't been arrested in years. To me, her last 5 years were her best years. She was just very comfortable, her sister Mary Mason also interviewed last year. Michelle had friends. She had relationships. She was honest in those relationships. They knew what her situation was. And nothing was more important to her than family, which had supported her during the dark years clouded by addiction. For them, it was the ultimate surprise when Mason's body turned up inside the Imperial Avenue house. She had licked that stuff almost, her mother said. Michelle Mason was born December 1963, the fifth of six kids. She grew up in an insular neighborhood near the Cleveland Garfield Heights border where her mom had lived since the 1970s. Her brother's mother lived Her mother's brother lived around the corner. She attended the nearby Cranwood Elementary School as well as Charles W. Eliot Junior High. Every Sunday, she and her family walked a block north on East 134th First Street to attend St. Timothy Catholic Church, now Holy Spirit Church. She knew the area's streets and sidewalks perhaps too well. By the time she became a teenager, she itched to leave Cleveland. She wanted to travel. Just That's just the way she was, said her mother. Mason made it clear she wasn't interested in going to high school. She attended a Cleveland Job Corps program for a while before heading to New Jersey and New York. When she left for New York, we didn't see her for a while, said her mom, who was so mystified by her daughter's dropping out of touch that she filed a missing persons report. Mason called occasionally to say she was okay, but didn't stay in close contact. It was during that period that Mason became addicted to heroin, the family later learned. New Jersey authorities contacted Atterbury in 1986 to say Mason had given birth to a baby and couldn't take care of him. The family had the boy brought back to Cleveland, where older sister Mary Mason took him in. 2 years later, Michelle Mason had another son. Her relatives huddled to decide what to do. Financially, as a single parent, I couldn't take them both in, Mary Mason said. So they decided that Atterbury would raise him. Mason's mother and sister, who lived around the corner from each other, sent the boys to private school, made sure they attended church, and were surrounded by family. The father's identity were known, but the men were uninvolved in the boys' lives. In the early 1990s, when Mason said she was ready to come back home, Atterbury sent her a bus ticket. It was a skinny and sick version of Mason who returned. She had been infected with HIV due to her extravenous drug use. Although she appeared to have kicked her heroin addiction, she was hooked on cocaine. Mason lived with her mother or with other relatives who all tried to encircle her with stability, but the streets competed for her attention. Mason was arrested 9 times between 1993 and 2001, mostly on drug charges. In recent interviews, Mason's family said they don't want her troubles rehashed in the media. Mason struggled mightily to overcome her addiction and her health challenges and to leave the ugly past behind, they said. A turning point came several years ago when Mason got shot in the face on East 131st Street and thrown into a garage. Covered in blood and near death, she made it to a nearby mini mart and got help. Doctors removed the shattered eye and replaced it with a glass one. The bullet remained in the back of her neck. That's when relatives say they realized how tough Mason was and how determined she was to recover her life. Living with one eye was very complicated, her son said. She still pulled through. She had a tough life, Mary Mason added in an interview last year. She got turned around there and had some bad years, but she came through. She was very strong. She had the right attitude. I often said if you could bottle what she had, her personality, her outlook, it was a lifesaver to her. She didn't stress and worry and let that kill her. Her illness, whatever she did, not let her get things down. She took it in stride and did what she had to do and went on. Mary Mason said that she and her free spirited, smiling sister were close and that the family repeatedly forgave Mason for her mistakes and kept loving her. We have our dysfunction, but we know one thing. We love and care very deeply for one another, Mary Mason said last year through tears. We fought to try to keep things together. We fought for these children. Yeah, Michelle had a drug history. Yes, she had arrests. There were no secrets. We didn't pretend she wasn't their mother. She was free to come to any of our homes, she added. By 2001, Atterbury could see the change in her daughter. Mom, I'm getting off that stuff, Atterbury recalled her daughter having said. Mason kept her word, walking nearly 4 miles round trip from Atterbury's home to attend drug treatment sessions at Marymount Hospital. After completing treatment, she continued to attend recovery meetings and also stopped in regularly at the Catholic church down the street to stay centered. She had a Bible they gave her in treatment. She used to read that Bible all the time, her mother said. It was a hard role for her, but she did it, and I am proud of her. For Mason, who hadn't been arrested since 2001, her final years were full of happiness and personal peace. She became active with the local AIDS task force and was a much loved volunteer there. I know they love my mother. They got nothing but positive things to say about her, her son said. I know she used to go to AA meetings. She would give speeches that were very strong. They influenced people. Mason regularly visited her mom, but rented a one-room apartment near East 121st Street in Buckeye. She managed her bills and medicines on her own. She was proud of how she turned her life around, her son said. She will always stand up and tell somebody, yeah, I was addicted to drugs, but look what I've done, he said last year. The house she was staying in was just a boarding room, but that was her first legit spot on her own without any of her boyfriends helping or anybody. She also stayed in contact with both of her sons, who are in their 20s. Ricardo lives in Cleveland, while his brother has relocated to Georgia. So it raised eyebrows one October morning in 2008 when she left her mother's home saying she would return later in that day, but never came back. 3 days later, Ricardo noticed her phone was going straight to voicemail. Relatives filed a missing person report with Cleveland police, searched endlessly for her, and grew frustrated at their inability to get news coverage. When we held a candlelight vigil right here at the church and sent out a press release, nobody came, said Mary Mason. Her attempts to mobilize Cleveland police, the FBI, and local media to help in the search just fell on deaf ears all the way around. We had nobody behind us, she said. Atterbury said her heart leapt once she saw a woman's a woman waiting at the bus stop. With skinny legs crossed just like Mason's, she pulled over for a closer look and found herself having to explain why she was staring sadly at the woman. I'm sorry, I thought you were my daughter. She's been missing for a while, she said. The woman came to the car and gave her a hug. Now that Mason's death has been tied to the high profile Sowell case, relatives say they are heartbroken, trying to imagine how the two crossed paths. Family members and police checked Mason's phone records and found no calls to Sowell. But Mason's apartment wasn't far from Sowell's home. She probably got off of the bus, walked down Imperial. That's probably how he got her, Mary Mason said last year. I don't think she knew him at all, she added. I don't think he befriended her because he may have spoken nicely to her. That would have been just like her always sunny smiley I'm sorry. That would have been just like her always sunny sister to smile back at Sowell and give him her attention, she said. She was friendly because she lived in the streets, Mason said. She thought she was a good judge of people. Rest in peace, Michelle Mason. Kim Smith and her father made a pact to take care of each other. Smith stayed with him and looked out for him after he developed a spinal injury that left him in a wheelchair. Singing as she cleaned up the apartment, cooking his favorite dish, steak and potatoes, picking up his prescriptions, and making sure he got to his doctor's appointments. Her father, a Marine Corps veteran, loved and supported her despite her drug addiction. He encouraged her to turn her life around. paid for her drug treatment programs and psychologists, provided her with a place to stay, food, and spending money. But Smith took much better care of her father than she did of herself. She hung around the wrong people and smoked crack cocaine, one of the drugs the prosecutors say serial killing suspect Anthony Sowell used to lure her and 10 other women into his Imperial Avenue home. She was 44 where she was found dead there. She never married and was the only one of the 11 victims who never had children. Friends describe her as the artsy type. She loved singing and art, and she had talent. Her family says she worked as a backup singer for local acts. The good times, however, never lasted long. She always gave into her vice, the drugs, and ended up behind bars where her creative talents were reduced to sending drawings from prison. But her father never gave up on her. He visited her in the lockup and took her in when she came home. He kept believing she could change, and then she was gone. Kim Yvette Smith was born January 20th, 1965 at Huron Road Hospital to Virginia Herndon and Donald Smith. She was their only child together. Smith had a son from a previous relationship who didn't live with the family. Donald Smith worked at a bottling company in Maple Heights, and her mother worked downtown as a bookkeeper. They lived in a house on East 145th Street and Kinsman Road. Smith had a typical childhood. She liked to play with dolls, watch cartoons, and have playdates with cousins. She had a soft spot for animals. She loved the family dog Champ, a shepherd and collie mix, and sometimes brought home stray cats. She attended Robert Fulton Elementary School and Alexander Hamilton Middle School. By the time she entered high school, her parents had divorced. Her mother remarried, and Smith attended Warrensville Heights High and lived with her stepfather and three stepbrothers. Smith's mother could not be reached for comment for the story. Donald Smith said he had infrequent visits with his daughter during that period, but he continued to support her financially. He thinks she began to use drugs while in high school, first marijuana, then cocaine and other drugs. I really don't know everything she did as a teenager, Smith said. Her mother and I weren't on good terms, so I just tried to deal with my daughter. Smith looked older than her age, her father said, and older men took notice. She didn't have many girlfriends her age, but hung around an older crowd. She became rebellious, he said. I didn't like it, and naturally I was upset about it, he said, because she was attractive and I knew what those guys wanted. But she stayed with her mother. I would say that her body grew before her mind did. Smith graduated from Warrensville Heights High in 1983 and later attended Cuyahoga County Community College. She studied art, dance, and other subjects, but she continued to use drugs, her father said. Smith picked up her first felony conviction in 1985 when she was charged with receiving stolen property. She racked up more over the years, mostly for drug offenses. The last one came in 2006 after she was arrested at East 83rd Street and Glade Avenue in Cleveland. Police found her with cocaine. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Her father said he visited her whenever she was incarcerated and encouraged her to get off of drugs. She always said she wanted to get clean. I never missed a visit, ever, Donald Smith said. You see, she was incarcerated but not rehabilitated. Smith's last stint in prison ended in 2007. By then, her father had undergone the surgery that left him in a wheelchair. He arranged for his daughter to go into several drug treatment programs. She stayed with him while she completed the programs. Her aunt, Christine, and Smith made attempts to get clean, and that Donald Smith was one of the few people who stuck around through the tough times. Even when he was upset and disappointed, he was there. Smith wanted to be there for her father the way he had been there for her, Christine said. Her only desire when she got out of jail was to get back on her feet and take care of her father, Christine said. But not too long after she moved in with her father, Smith began disappearing for a day or two at a time. She would call to check on him, but he knew what she was doing, using. Renee Ottrick said she did drugs with Smith, whose street name was Candy. Ottrick said she and Smith looked out for each other. She was a sweet person and very free spirited. She couldn't deal with some of the things that came with the drugs, Renee said. Donald Smith last saw his daughter on January 17th, 2009, 3 days after her 44th birthday. Smith was shopping with Christine. Donald Smith said he put $100 in his daughter's hand and told her to have a good time. Christina Smith went to a shopping plaza near the Lee Harvard intersection. Christine said she bought her niece some clothes and they had Chinese for lunch. Smith was in good spirits, Christine said. She took Smith back to her father's apartment and the aunt and niece said they loved each other. Smith later told her dad she was going out for the night. She came up and gave me a hug and a kiss, her father said. She said she had to go and walked out. Days passed and he didn't hear from her. He feared something had happened to her, he said, so he began his own search. He put up a $1,000 reward for information about his daughter's whereabouts. He reached out to her friends and they placed her picture on telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards and in gas stations. Smith said he got a lot of calls, but most were from people offering bad information, just in an attempt to get the reward money. But one night he got a call that was different from the others. A voice on the other line told him that his daughter was dead. He said he didn't want to believe it. A few months later, he learned of the bodies inside Sowell's home. He filed a missing persons report. When investigators called on people missing loved ones to submit a DNA testing to help identify the bodies, he went to the Cuyahoga County Coroner's office to provide a sample. He soon heard the news that he dreaded. His daughter was dead. Rest in peace, Kim Yvette Smith. Nancy Cobbs knew she hadn't always been the mother she wanted to be, so she tries to make up for it by being there for her grandchildren. Cobbs doted on her 5 grandkids. She taught some of them to ride bikes and took them to the park. She cooked for them and took them to doctor's appointments. Life had taught Cobbs harsh lessons about lost time. She fell into the trap of addiction. Years she could have spent being a mother, she spent in prison instead. She didn't want to miss the chance to watch her grandchildren grow up. But when she wasn't with her family, she struck up a friendship with a man in the neighborhood. Cobbs and her friend sipped cans of beer from the corner store on the porch at her mother's house on Griffin Avenue in Cleveland, 3 blocks north of Imperial Avenue. The man exchanged greetings with relatives who visited the home. They knew him by face more than by name. They didn't view him as a danger. It wasn't until after the remains of 11 women were found in a house on Imperial Avenue that they learned his full name, Anthony Sowell. Cobbs was one of the 11 women found dead at Sowell's house in the fall of 2009. She had gone missing in April of that year. A grassroots force of family, friends, and neighbors kicked in doors in abandoned homes in the areas looking for her. They never thought to look in Sowell's house. That's where her body was discovered 6 months later. Before Cobbs, 44, developed an addiction or spent time behind bars, however, she was an active mother of 3 children. She worked factory, fast food, and housekeeping jobs. But somewhere along the way, her life unraveled. She went through a divorce and then a breakup of a long term relationship. She got hooked on drugs and ran afoul of the law. After my mother and father separated, she just would be in the streets, said her youngest daughter, Audrey Williams. Nancy Cobbs was born in 1966 in Cleveland to Mrs. Cobbs and Louis Congress. She was their only child. Her parents were not married. They lived in a house on Griffin Avenue. Cobbs attended Harvey Rice Middle School and John Hay High School. She never graduated from John Hay. She dropped out after she became pregnant, but later obtained her GED. She had a daughter, Kiana, and married the child's father, William Hunt. He joined the military. Cobb stayed in Cleveland while he served. They had a second child, a boy named William III. But Cobbs and Hunt divorced a few years later. Her children from that marriage declined to be interviewed for this story. Her mother also declined an interview. Cobbs later met Adam Williams at the Old Mad Hunter nightclub at East 18th Street and Prospect Avenue in the early 80s. They struck up a relationship. They were together for 9 years. Williams said Cobbs used drugs early in the relationship, but he stopped using drugs after she became pregnant with their daughter, Audrey, he said, and he started to look at ways to provide for the family. Nancy was a good person to people who knew her, It's just the only person who she hurt and abused was herself, Adam Williams said. In 1994, Adam Williams moved to Kansas to go to a truck driving school. The whole family was to relocate there, he said, but cops hit the street and eventually ended up in jail. We just kind of drifted apart after that, and she kept using, Adam Williams said. Adam Williams said he provided for his daughter financially, but her mother took custody of her while Cobbs was in jail. He returned to Cleveland in the late 1990s and now works as a driver here. Audrey Williams, 23, said she and her mother were close. She said she was a mama's girl who never left her mother's side. Cobbs taught her how to bake cookies, make jewelry, and decorate. My dad would try to get me to go on the road with him, but I always wanted to be around my mother, Audrey Williams said. I went with her everywhere. I was the baby, and we were really close. Cobbs was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 1996 for drug trafficking and possessing criminal tools. She served 2 years at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Her mother took custody of Audrey Williams and her siblings. Audrey Williams rebelled and found her own trouble with the police. My father did his own thing, she said. All of my friends had their moms, and I felt like nobody cared. So I did what I wanted to do. She had her first child at the age of 13. Audrey Williams visited her mother in prison, but was angered by their estranged sorry, but was angered by their estrangement. Still, she remained her mother's biggest advocate, even when other relatives gave up on her mom because of the chronic drug use. I never approved of it, and we used to get in fights because I wanted to see her better herself, Audrey Williams said. She had a problem, but it wasn't to the point to where she was a junkie. Cobbs lived in a series of apartments in the city and at her mother's home after prison. She moved in with Audrey Williams in an apartment near Quincy Avenue in 2007 and helped care for her two grandchildren. Cobbs was devoted to her children. She went all out on their birthdays, buying gifts and cooking, Audrey Williams recalled. I really didn't have to do anything, Audrey Williams said. She would decorate the house to get everything together. She did everything she could to make sure my kids didn't miss out on having a grandma, but she also ran the streets. The last time Audrey Williams saw her mother was in April of 2009. Cobbs had spent the day with her daughter, and the kids but left the apartment that night. She said she would be back. Cobbs didn't return. The next day, Audrey Williams went to the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority police to file a missing persons report. She said it wasn't like her mother to not call her to let her know where she was. They talked every day. Audrey Williams made missing person flyers at her children's daycare and posted them on community boards, at corner stores, and on telephone poles in the Buckeye neighborhood. She said the flyers would always disappear a day or two later. She had suspicions her mother was trapped in a home. I would always come back a day or two later. They would be gone, Audrey Williams said. I wonder why someone would take them down. During the summer before Cobb's body was discovered, she formed a search group with more than 30 of her friends and relatives. They broke down the doors of abandoned homes in the city in search of her mother. They went into foreclosed and abandoned homes on streets including Griffin, Forest, and Parkview Avenues, but they never looked on Imperial Avenue. When they heard about the bodies being found inside the Sowell's home in 2009, Audrey Williams and her sister, Kiana Hunt, went to get their DNA tested at the coroner's office. They found out their mother was dead. The man who used to drink beer with her mother and sit on the porch had been charged with her murder. I never thought anything of him, Audrey Williams said. I just used to say hi to this guy and had no idea what he was going to do. Cobb's death caused Audrey to reassess her own life. She has three young children. She knew she was headed down the same path as her mother, so she decided to change course. She attends a cosmetology school in Cleveland Heights, and she says she wants to make sure her children has a stable parental presence. She says she loved her mother and misses her every day, but she doesn't want to become her. My grandmother would tell me to slow down from what I was doing or that I would end up like my mother, she said. When that stuff happened with her, it was really a wake up call. Rest in peace, Nancy Cobs. Imelda Amy Hunter's family sorry. Imelda Amy Hunter's family fondly remembers a bookworm of a girl who really loved reading the classics while growing up in Chicago. The tragic tale of Anne Frank, who spent years hiding in a tiny space during the Holocaust before dying in a concentration camp, fascinated her. She loved the story, her oldest sister, Lynette Hunter Taylor, recently recalled. By the time she was 14, Hunter's own harsh reality had set in. She became pregnant by a teacher, her sister said. Hunter's daughter, Kelly, was born deaf with cerebral palsy. Life continued to press in on Hunter over the years, and she found solace in drugs, a coping mechanism she learned from her family. Drugs would become her hiding place. In her final years, she retreated to a house at 12205 Imperial Avenue in Cleveland when she felt overcome by life's troubles, relatives said. It was the home of Anthony Sowell. Hunter, the sixth of eight children, grew up on Chicago's South Side in the 1970s. After she became a teen mom, it spurred her oldest sister, Taylor, then married and living in Cleveland, to drive to Chicago in 1978 and pick up her mom and siblings. Hunter's mother, who was from Cleveland, had been abandoned by her second husband. Some family members say they don't know much about the father of Hunter's first baby, but Taylor, the oldest sibling, said she was told Hunter became pregnant by a teacher who gave her alcohol at a party. Taylor says she moved her family back to Cleveland, thinking it would be better if she had them near her, but things only got worse. Drugs and alcohol surrounded Hunter, making it inevitable that she would get hooked, relatives said. Another of Hunter's sisters, Diane Keller, 52, said in an interview last year that she was introduced to crack cocaine by her siblings. My family started me, she said. My older brothers and sisters were already using. Keller said she had been sober since 2000. Taylor agreed that everyone in their family was exposed to alcohol and drugs. She sometimes took her younger sisters, including Amy, to bars on East 150, 100, sorry. She sometimes took her sisters, including Amy, to bars on East 105th Street, where they drink and mingle with older men. There were two they were too young to be in those places, but as long as they were too young to be in those places, but as long as they didn't tell my mother, we would go, she said. They grew up fast messing with me. When I grew up, that's just what everybody was doing. I always wanted more for Amy because she was exceptionally smart. Hunter's grief over her daughter Kelly, who is unable to talk or hear and lives in a group home, may have tempted her early on to seek escape through drugs, some say. With the baby having CP, that bothered her and stressed her, a relative said. She carried it emotionally inside of herself. She wouldn't talk about it. Honey, Hunter met Bobby Dancy at a bar when she was 19, and the two became a longtime couple. Though they never married, he always kept a roof over her head, relatives say. Hunter and Dancy had three children: Bobby Jr., 24, Andrew, 22, and a daughter, Victoria, who died of a birth defect. Dancy kept a job as a machine operator for 25 years. Hunter, who never finished high school, dabbled at a lot of different jobs, including working as a hairstylist, home health care aide, and elections board employee. Dancy said it took years before he realized she had a drug problem. She was so discreet with it, I didn't know, he said. I was ignorant. I didn't know what it was because I didn't do no drugs myself. But after he realized she had a crack habit, their relationship became rocky, said Dancy, himself a heavy drinker. We had fights, I won't deny, he said. It was always because of her leaving and leaving the kids by themselves. I didn't like that. He would wake up in the morning to find her gone, but it wasn't unusual for him to return from work to find her waiting with a ready dinner, a clean house, and a promise that she wasn't going to use crack again. Sometimes she disappeared for days. Little disappointments could set her off. Next thing I know, she's gone again, he said. It was frustrating. Several times she went through outpatient drug programs, but she never cleaned herself up completely. Hunter was arrested 3 times on drug and theft charges, court records show, and she served some time in 2001 at the women's prison in Marysville for drug possession. When she got out, my sister had this darkness, this sadness around her, said Taylor. It's a lot of stuff that goes on in jail. I have seen it myself. Hunter's sons learned to fend for themselves because of her frequent absences. When she was home, she might be found on the couch reading from her book collection or watching TV quiz shows. She would sometimes ask her son Bobby to help her become a contestant on Jeopardy! And to this day, he regrets he didn't. It used to shock me sitting next to her that she would answer those questions correctly, he said. She was so smart, said her son, who said he sometimes flips through books that his mother, Hunter, kept on walls on. Wait, let me start that over. She was so smart, said her son, who said he sometimes flips through the books that Hunter kept on a wall of shelves at their house. I think she felt restricted due to some of the choices she made in her life, and things just happened. Maybe she felt crippled by those things. Maybe that caused her to be more miserable and use more and abuse more. Yet in 2007, things seemed to be getting better. Her relatives all recall a 6-month lull when it seemed she had kicked her habit. She had started going to the word church, and it restored some of her enthusiasm for life. It was like therapy for her, said Denise Hunter, 47, Amy's sister. She looked new, she said. She looked like, I got me some joy. I got me a little hope. Then in the snowy spring of 2009, she disappeared. She didn't return the next day or the next week. Dancy didn't notify police, assuming she was back to her old habits. He was used to her off and on appearances. But the lovely lull had ended. This time, she didn't come back. When Denise Hunter saw the Imperial Avenue house flash on television last October, her heart sank. She recognized it. Maybe 2 years earlier, Hunter had talked her into walking over to the same house for what she called a late night rendezvous with a friend named Tony. The living room was dark, but the dining room was full of guests, she recalls. Several women were in the house, and one offered the Hunter sister something to drink. Denise Hunter, who lives on Cleveland's west side, said she didn't stay because she didn't feel comfortable in a house of strangers. The east side's kind of rough for me. Crimes and a lot of drug infestation. Anything could happen. She didn't meet Sowell before she left. The women in his dining room seemed to be regulars, and perhaps her sister was too. I got the impression she had seen the ladies before, Denise Hunter said. It was like, come on in, have a seat. Taylor said Hunter, who once lived up the street from Sowell, considered him a friend and sometimes dropped by his home to lose herself in drugs and alcohol, relatives said. When she would leave to be gone for a little while, that's whose house she was at, said Taylor, 55. The impression that gave me the impression she gave me of Anthony Sowell was this was a nice man and that he was nice to her and did whatever he could for her. He was her buddy. Amy's brother, John Hunter, also remembers a day when Amy asked to be dropped off at the same house in 2005. They now know that the house on Imperial lured in and trapped more women than just their sister. Denise Hunter cries when thinking about the sorrow that led the women there. My sister and all the rest of the ladies are in a better place, she said. They never got to cry again or wonder how they're going to please someone. They don't have to worry about that anymore. Every one of those girls had a life. They weren't drug addicts all their lives. That burns me up. But they're never going to suffer on this earth again. Rest in peace, Imelda Amy Hunter. Not even the sunny skies of California could keep Webb from the Buckeye Road area she called home. Cleveland was her comfort zone. It is where she went to school, where she fell in love, where she made a life. But Webb, just like her neighborhood, fell victim to the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s and 90s. She walked the streets in search of drugs. She got into trouble with police. She went missing in June 2009, and investigators found her body in the home of serial killing suspect Anthony Sowell 5 months later. She was 48. Before Webb gave into her addiction, she was the family jokester. She loved to pull pranks, relatives said, and she loved being with family. She was the fourth of 6 children born to Joanne and James Webb Sr. The family lived in her grandmother's house on Manor Avenue in Cleveland. Her father worked in construction and did carpentry work on the side. Her mother worked in a home for women with special needs. The family was active at St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church on Carnegie Avenue, relatives said. Webb was baptized at the church as a child. She sang in the choir and served as an usher. Her 53-year-old sister Audrey recalled that when they were kids, Webb often told jokes around the house and tried to get her siblings. Webb got introduced to drugs, Harrell said. My family put her onto the drugs, he said. It made me angry because I saw what it was doing to them. They sent her son back to Cleveland to stay with relatives while they stayed out west. Then Webb started to get homesick. They returned to Ohio and found that crack was prevalent around their old neighborhood. Harrell said he started to use drugs to keep Webb around. See, I cared about her so much that in order for me to keep her home, I had to buy drugs to be with her, said Harrell, who added that he had been clean since 2005. Neither one of us did drugs when we first got married. If I didn't have anything inside of our home, she was gone. I wanted to be with her. They began to drift apart after their addictions got the best of them, Harrell said. They both cheated and they argued frequently. We weren't getting along, and it wasn't like how a husband and wife should be because we both did what we wanted, he said. And Webb got into trouble with the law. Records show she was convicted of crimes that included drug possession and trafficking, carrying a concealed weapon, and receiving stolen property. Her younger sibling, Frances Webb, 48, said despite her sister's problems, she was the one who brought everyone together whenever there was a rift. She said Webb was all about family and cared for her nieces, nephews, and grandchildren. She was a peacemaker and the one who brought everyone together after my parents were gone. Frances Webb said. She had a great sense of humor, and you couldn't say no to her. Webb tried several times to quit drugs, Audrey Webb, who has been clean for close to 10 years, said. Her sister often asked for advice on getting sober. She tried to get off the drugs and tried to fight it, Audrey Webb said, but it was hard for her. Buckeye just wasn't good for her. Harrell admitted that even after their divorce, he continued to enable Webb's drug use. She would stop by his place and he would give her money. He knew what it was for. The last time he saw Webb was about 4 months before she was discovered inside of Sowell's home. He said she stopped by his home near Buckeye Road to borrow money. She would always come around when she knew I got a check, he said. I'm the type of person that when I give you money, it's not my business what you do with it. But he also tried to counsel her about drug abuse. Once he sobered up, he saw the difference it made in his life. I told her it was time to leave the drugs alone, Harrell said. She started to cry, but it didn't do her any good. Webb went missing on June 3rd, 2009. The family filed a missing person report a month later. They posted flyers in the neighborhood searching for her. It wasn't like her to stay away very long. She always kept in touch with her siblings, who had become close after their mother died from cancer 4 years ago. She lived with her boyfriend, Ronald Bowie, in Lakewood. He could not be reached to comment for this story. Webb often visited her grandmother or went to visit her son's 3 children and stopped by a beauty salon where her cousin worked. Audrey Webb said her sister called her every day. The last time she spoke with her, she said she was coming over. She never did. Rest in peace, Janice Webb. She was a sweet faced girl named Talisha who stood out amid the horde of kids running and playing at an Akron adoption picnic. As she quickly caught the eye of Inez Fortson, a mother of 2 boys looking to add a daughter to her family. When Fortson spied the 9-year-old and her sister happily playing patty cake, she applied to adopt them both. But Fortson, a divorcee, was only allowed to adopt Talisha, so the girls were split up. Talisha cried at first when the social worker dropped her off at Forson's Cleveland home. To break the ice, the two walked to the nearby Silverman store, where her new mom brought her toys and let her pick out polka dot sheets for her bed. I let her pick out anything she wanted, Fortson said. But the little girl who arrived with her belongings in a garbage bag never got over her feelings of abandonment, friends said. She ran away often as a teenager and seemed like a lifelong search. to feel as if she belonged to someone. Excuse me. Talisha was really trying to find love, family friend and neighbor Deborah Williams said. She wanted a family. That's what she wanted. Somebody that could just love her. Of the 11 women whose bodies were discovered in the Imperial Avenue house, she was one of the last to disappear. I think she had found the love she was looking for. I think if she had found the love that she was looking for, she might not have been in that house, Williams said. Talisha Forson was about 5 or 6 when she was separated from her parents and placed in Cuyahoga County's foster care system, according to someone she knew. Her biological mother struggled with a drug addiction, and her father was an alcoholic, friends said. She had little contact with her parents, but later their weaknesses would catch up with her. Her adoptive mother, Inez Fortson, was a school bus monitor. Now retired, she lives in an East Cleveland house decorated to resemble an indoor garden, filled with plants, aquariums, statuary, and chirping birds in cages. Wind chimes on the front door tinkle to a night. Sorry. Wind chimes on the front porch. I said that wrong again. Sorry. Wind chimes on the front door tinkle to announce a visitor's arrival. This is the same type of fanciful environment where she raised Talisha, taught her to care for animals and to keep a clean house, Inez Fortson said. It seemed to fit the little girl who, like her adoptive mother, had an artistic side. She enjoyed arranging flowers and had a special talent for styling hair, even as a little girl. She had the most gentle hands, Inez Fortson said. When you braid a person's hair, it hurts because you're pulling. I let her braid my hair one time and she was gentle. Inez Fortson often encouraged her daughter to get her cosmetology license. I just couldn't get her to take up a trade, she said. I wanted her to do hair and nails. She said she would, but she never did. Not everything in Talisha Forson's life was beautiful. She once told a social worker she had been abusing marijuana since age 14 and cocaine since age 20. She ran away repeatedly, often ending up on one particular doorstep. She would always run to my grandmother, said Ebony Groomster, 36, whose grandmother, Lucille Groomster, had been an early foster mother to Talisha Fortson. My grandmother never closed the door on her, no matter what the repercussions were. Like many foster kids, Fortson felt unwanted and like a misfit, Groomster said. When you're just shifted from one family to another, you have no stability. You go haywire, she said. But she tried to take the good with the bad and make the best of it. Fortune seemed to be on her own during her teen years, living at various homes, living at various friends' homes, I'm sorry. Her adoptive mother says she tried her best to lay down the rules, but Fortune lashed out and refused to behave. We got along like two pit bulls, Inez Fortune said. She stayed different places. She didn't want to stay in one place. I didn't tie her down. I just let her enjoy life. I'm glad I did because it was going so fast. By age 17, Fortson was living at Bellafair Residential Treatment Facility in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which provides help to which provides help to youth facing abuse, neglect, drug dependency, or mental health problems. There, she twice got in trouble with the law for criminal damaging and assault. Still, she completed high school classes and in 1997 received her diploma. She was determined to graduate. That was one of her goals, said Williams, the friendly neighbor whom Fortson called Auntie. While living under strict supervision at Bellafair's dorms, Fortson had the support and structure to accomplish many goals. But when she left the program, she got off track. In 2001 and 2002, she was arrested on drug charges. Then in 2003, she tested positive for cocaine while pregnant. She gave birth to son Christian that April. The father's identity was unknown, and the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services moved quickly to start the process of removing the baby from her custody. Mother has engaged in acts of domestic violence, child at risk, a social worker's report stated. Mother has attempted suicide on 4 occasions. Social worker reports also indicated Forson failed to complete 3 drug treatment programs in 2003. Lacks the parenting skills to care for the child, the report read. Has only visited sporadically. Does not have a permanent home, the social worker also noted. It was true. Fortson was still jumping around, staying with East Cleveland neighbors, with boyfriends, and at shelters. Her most consistent companion seemed to be the drugs. As Christian's custody case wound through the courts, Fortson had her second child on Christmas Eve 2004. Again, Fortson failed a prenatal cocaine screening as well as one at the time of birth. She lost custody of the baby, which she named Talisha. She was 20. Her boyfriend, Terrence Minor, was 16 years older than her, with a history of repeated incarcerations for theft, burglary, and drug charges. It was one of several unhealthy relationships, Williams said. Talisha was looking for love in the wrong places, she said. If she could have found a good partner, I think Talisha would have been just fine. But Forson's boyfriends were never the type to treat her well and help her get clean, Williams said. Instead, it was always a letdown. In 2006, pregnant again by Minor, Fortson arrived at Laura's home, a Cleveland shelter operated by the city mission. When Talisha first came into Laurel's home, she was broken, said Tammy Mitchell, a caseworker there. She just wanted to get herself on track. I just remember her putting her whole self into the program. She wrote a lot. She wrote poems, kept journals. She had some struggles, but she didn't want to abide by authority at first. Shelter workers could see that she wanted to put the past behind her and become a stable, loving mom, Mitchell said. Forston delivered her third child, Tanya, in November 2006 and was making good progress at Laura's home. It was the longest period she ever had to bond with the baby, friends said. She sang in the shelter's choir, threw herself into other Laurel's home activities, and was approved for a job training program. Thinking she was doing well enough to leave and make it on her own, Fortson moved out in the spring of 2007. But she returned to Laura's home a few months later, devastated because she had relapsed and lost custody of her baby. Williams, the family friend and neighbor, had adopted Fortson's oldest son. Minor eventually received custody of both his daughters. Fortson sobbed before a panel of staffers as they grilled her about whether she was truly ready to change. Mitchell won't forget Fortson's words that day. She was absolutely positive that if she went out there again, she would die, Mitchell said. They hugged her and let her back in. We've worked here long enough to know who's sincere, said Mitchell. She knew. The life she was living, she couldn't keep doing. I know I could get, I know I can get some peace here, she told the shelter staffers. Yet she was still firmly in addiction's grip. The next day, she left and didn't come back. Workers at the local shelter remember her fondly and say their hearts broke when they heard the news that Forson's remains had been found inside Anthony Sowell's house. Excuse me. We all loved her. We were grief stricken, Kathy Alexander, administrator at the downtown women's shelter, said last year. She had seemed so close to making it, the staffer said. In 2008, Forson served time for stealing money. While in prison, she sent Williams a letter revealing that feelings of being unwanted were still weighing her down. I feel like an outcast in her family, she wrote of her adoptive mom. But as I continue to pray to the Lord, it has gotten a little better each day, knowing that it is only one more day closer to me being a productive citizen and a good mom to my children. She was last seen in early June 2009 when she stopped by her old street in East Cleveland. She came bearing bags of groceries for her adoptive mom. They cleaned her house and fried some chicken for her, as she had done so many times before. Inez Forson later reported her missing to East Cleveland police. After the bodies were discovered on Imperial Avenue, the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office asked Forson's family for identifying marks. Look for tattoos, they answered. Fortson had proudly had the names of her 3 children inked on her arm, but her body was too decomposed for the tattoos to be revealed. Rest in peace, Talisha Fortson. Diane Turner seemed poised for a comeback in 2001. One by one, her 5 children had been taken from her. She had spent her years self-medicating her shame and pain away with street drugs. But she had been sober for 21 months and was pregnant with her daughter of her new boyfriend. She was involved in a church and had finally broken her long-time addiction to crack cocaine. She truly believed she could be a real mom to the little girl she would name Denise. When Denise was born, it was probably the best time of her life, the boyfriend, James Martin, said. She was clean. Everything was good. But like everything good in Turner's life, it didn't last. Excuse me. Social workers swooped in and removed Denise from her mom's care 4 days after she was born. Turner fought to get her daughter back, but failed. It shattered her, and she relapsed again, Martin said. After more years of abusing drugs, Turner disappeared in September 2009, the last to go missing of the 11 women whose remains were found in a house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland. Her body was found in the third floor bedroom of Anthony Sowell's house. Her remains lingered unidentified in the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office, the longest as well. It took more than a month to confirm her identity because of the tattered family ties. Turner had always lived in the shadows of society's fringes. The Cleveland woman was the type of detached drug abuser whose social service agencies find the most challenging to help. In between her jail stints, she frequently changed addresses and dropped out of drug treatment programs. Born November 4th, 1970, in Cleveland, Turner was the second of John and Mary Turner's 2 children. Turner's father raised them in Cleveland, according to what she told Martin. Turner's mother was not around much during her childhood, Martin said. He isn't sure why. Turner's father died in January, and the family spokesperson refused to be interviewed for this article. Martin said that Turner told him she and her brother had been physically abused as kids. She had epilepsy and suffered occasional seizures. Martin said she once told him she had been hit in the head with a hammer during an abusive encounter in her childhood. She had a rough life, said Martin. She didn't share too much. She said the only people that look out for you is the street. If you try to go get help from other places, they always try to tear you down. Turner had a heavy drug habit. Police arrested her a dozen times on drug charges between 1991 and 2009. She was well known to Cleveland police as a prostitute who flagged down cars on East Side streets looking for enough cash for her next high. She talked about her life in 2000 with a support group in the Cuyahoga County Jail. A plain dealer reporter wrote about the session. They said I was never going to be nothing, and I believed them, she said to the group. I've been in and out of here my whole life. I never had no family. I always been by myself. And the grim pattern continued for another generation when Turner became a mother. By age 24, Turner had 3 children in permanent custody of Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services due to her drug abuse problem and inability to provide proper care and support, records show. County workers referred her to drug treatment, but she did not participate. Juvenile court records show that when Turner gave birth in 1994 to her fourth child, both she and her daughter tested positive for cocaine. Police jailed her a few months later after she left the baby with a friend and disappeared, according to a social worker statement. The county stepped in and removed baby number 4. Mother had numerous opportunities to involve herself in services, 1995 county documents stated. She has not done this and is not likely to provide for the child in the near future. The child's the child is of age and would the child is of a young age and would best benefit from a grant of permanent custody and adoption. Turner bounced in and out of jails for the next few years. She gave birth to another child that was taken away. In the late 1990s, she struck up a relationship with Martin, a reformed addict she knew from her time spent hanging out on a strip of East 116th Street, known for its busy drug traffic. Martin said they moved in together after Turner visited him at home and asked if she could stay with him. He had one stipulation, he said. If you stay here, you can't do no drugs. A stint in the penitentiary had gotten him cleaned up, and Martin worked as a school maintenance man. I started showing her the way I knew to get clean, he said. When Turner moved into Martin's home on Ansel Road in the Huff area, he got a taste of how it felt to be a part of the community. He introduced her to local councilwoman Fannie Lewis, and they hit it off. Lewis convinced Turner to go to her church, University Church of Christ, on East 89th Street. Lewis died several years later in 2008. Fannie Lewis took her under her wing, he said. She was doing really good. She went through the 12 steps and was supported by the church and everything. She had a support group right there. Living clean was by no means easy, but Turner was determined to try. She ran across a few bumps in the road, but she kept on trying to stay sober, Martin said. In 2001, police pulled over the couple over, sorry. In 2001, police pulled the couple over on a traffic stop and ended up arresting Turner for an earlier probation violation. During her 6-month jail stint, she discovered she was pregnant with Martin's child, her sixth. When she got out of jail, she continued to stay away from drugs and she kept all her prenatal appointments, Martin said. She wanted to keep that baby, Martin said. But her spirits were doused in November 2001 when county workers removed her 4-day-old baby, Denise, despite evidence that Turner had not used drugs in 21 months. To get her daughter back, Turner agreed to enroll with the newborn at Miracle Village, a now closed residential drug treatment program operated by Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority. But again, she found more obstacles scattered in her way. Juvenile courts Juvenile court records indicate that Miracle Village staffers asked county officials to remove Turner's child from the facility in December 2001 after observing Turner overfeeding her infant and feeding her spoiled milk. Mother frequently passes out and often requires excessive amounts of sleep due to her epilepsy, which prevents mother from providing proper care for the child, the document also stated. Martin blamed unhelpful helpful social workers and treatment center policies for the way things unfolded and said the situation left Turner feeling demoralized. He said treatment care staffers discouraged Turner from continuing in the program, saying they couldn't provide the extra help needed to care for her epileptic condition. Still, Martin encouraged Turner to stay at Miracle Village in hopes of reunifying their family. She kept telling me, they're not going to give her back, he said. I kept trying to convince her, but Turner left. She wasn't strong enough to stand up to them, Martin said. Instead of trying to build her up, the social services system destroyed her, he said. A spokesperson for the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services declined to discuss the case for privacy reasons, but did issue a statement earlier this month. The circumstances of Mrs. Turney Sorry, y'all. The circumstances of Turner's custody case boil down to child safety. We are obligated, both morally and legally, to protect children from abuse and neglect. Ms. Turner's case, like many other permanent custody cases, involved children and other family members whose right to privacy we will protect. A few months after leaving Miracle Village, Turner returned to the streets. She was arrested in April 2002 for drug possession. Meanwhile, the baby had been placed in foster care, which frustrated both parents. Martin said he asked a family friend, Jasneeth Groves, I may be mispronouncing that, to become the baby's foster mother in order to ensure that he and Turner would be able to visit. Martin completed parenting classes and obtained shared custody of Denise. Turner didn't complete her parenting classes, county records indicate. After Turner relapsed, she and Martin broke up. But she always stayed in contact with me, he said. If she needed something, I was there for her. Martin said despite her drug problem, Turner remained a good person and someone he trusted. She didn't bother nobody, he said. Some of these girls, they go out and steal from you. Diane wasn't like that. She was a drug addict. She wasn't no thief. She didn't drink. She was basically a quiet person. Martin and Turner last talked in September 2009 when she called to wish him a happy belated birthday. Then she dropped out of sight, which was unlike her. Diane always let someone know where she was, he said. Even if she got arrested, she would find a way to call within a few weeks. He knew something was wrong. A few friends commented that they hadn't seen Turner, who occasionally worked at Dadley's, a Jamaican restaurant and store on East 116th Street. People on the street, Martin said, have an informal network of friends who grow used to seeing them regularly and who check up on them. Within a few weeks, their mutual friends spread the word that they hadn't seen Turner. About the same time, news broke that the bodies found up the street at Anthony Sowell's house. The first 10 women were identified by the first week of November, but an entire month went by before Turner's body was identified. It was widely assumed that the reason the 11th woman hadn't been named is that no family members had bothered to report her missing. But that's not what happened, according to Martin. He said he got in touch with the coroner's office as soon as the bodies were found. The difficulty in finding a blood relative to supply DNA to compare with the body. Martin said he didn't know the whereabouts of Turner's first 5 children, and he had little contact with her father. He realized that his daughter, then age 7, would have to provide the necessary DNA. But she and her foster mom were out of the country visiting girls' relatives in Jamaica. It took Martin several weeks to make arrangements to fly Denise back to Cleveland. She finally returned on Thanksgiving Day, 2009. The next day, he took his daughter to the coroner's office. On December 4th, 2009, Diane Turner's identity as the 11th victim was released to the public. Rest in peace, Diane Turner.